the moment it happens, you almost miss it. You're standing beside your horse, not doing anything in particular. Maybe you've just finished brushing them down, or you're simply leaning against the fence post, watching the last light of the afternoon stretch across the paddock. You're not asking anything of them. You're just there. And then, slowly, without any fanfare, your horse turns their head toward you, exhales a long, slow, audible breath, and rests the weight of their jaw along your shoulder. They don't look at you, they just stay. And something in your chest shifts. You don't have a word for it. It's not quite joy and it's not quite peace. It's something older than both of those things. A feeling that something real just happened between two creatures who don't share a language, who don't share an evolutionary history of cooperation, who shouldn't, by any logical measure, why trust each other at all. You've probably had that moment, or something like it. The first time your horse stopped flinching when you reached for their face. The first time they walked toward you across the field without hesitation. Not because you had food, but just because you were there. The first time they let out that sigh, and if you're honest with yourself, you probably thought, they trust me now. You were right. But what you didn't know, what almost no one tells you, is what that moment actually cost them. What their nervous system had to overcome to arrive at that exhale. What shifted physically and neurologically inside their brain for that simple act of resting against you to become possible. Because trust, for a horse, is not a feeling. It is not something they decide to give you because you've been kind, or patient, or consistent. Trust for a horse is a biological state. And getting there, truly getting there, requires their brain to do something that goes against every instinct they were built with over 55 million years of evolution. What happens inside a horse's brain when they finally trust someone is one of the most remarkable things in all of animal neuroscience. And once you understand it, you will never look at that moment beside the fence the same way again. There is a question that almost nobody asks about horses. We talk endlessly about how to build trust with them. We talk about pressure and release, about body language, about approach and retreat. Now it's about spending hours in the round pen until the horse joins up and follows you like a shadow. We talk about earning trust as if it were a transaction. Put in the right amount of time, use the right techniques, and eventually the horse will hand it over. But nobody asks, what is actually happening inside the horse while all of this is unfolding? What is the nervous system doing? What is the brain processing? What has to change biologically for a 1,200-pound prey animal to override its deepest survival instinct and decide, at a cellular level, that a predator is safe? Because that is what you are to a horse. A predator. Not in your intentions, not in your heart, but in the architecture of what you are. You have forward-facing eyes, which, in the language of evolutionary biology, means one thing: you hunt. Your proportions, your gait, the way you move toward things rather than away from them, all of it registers in the horse's ancient threat detection system before you've said a word or made a single move. A horse's brain was not built for trust. It was built for survival. And survival for a prey animal living on open plains meant one thing above all else: run first, investigate never. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, in a horse is proportionally large and extraordinarily sensitive. It processes incoming sensory information in milliseconds and issues the alarm before the cortex, the thinking brain, has even begun to evaluate what's happening. This is not a flaw in the horse's design. It is the design. For millions of years, the horses who hesitated were the horses who were eaten. The ones who survived were the ones whose nervous systems were fastest to fear. So when you step into a field with a horse who doesn't know you yet, you are not just an unfamiliar person. You are an incoming threat signal that their brain has been primed to respond to since before they were born. And yet they learn to trust. Some of them deeply, profoundly, with a completeness that seems impossible given everything their biology is working against. The question isn't whether horses can trust. We see it happen. The question is, how does a brain built for fear become capable of safety? What has to change? And what are you actually doing, or not doing, when you're the person who gets to be on the other side of that change? The answer begins somewhere most people would never think to look. Not in the round pen, not in the training methodology, not even in the hours spent. It begins in the autonomic nervous system, the vast ancient network that governs everything a horse does before they think about it. In 1994, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges proposed something that would quietly revolutionize how we understand social behavior in mammals. He called it the polyvagal theory. The name is technical, but the idea is almost poetic in its simplicity. Porges had been studying the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem all the way down through the heart, lungs, and digestive system, and he noticed something that the standard two-state model of the nervous system couldn't explain. Everyone knew about fight or flight. Everyone knew about rest and digest. But Porges identified a third state, a state that sits above both of them, evolutionarily newer and almost exclusively social in its function. He called it the ventral vagal state, and it is, in the most literal neurological sense, the state of safe connection. When a mammal, human or horse, is in the ventral vagal state, everything changes. The heart rate becomes regulated, not racing and not artificially suppressed. The muscles around the eyes soften. The voice, or in horses, the vocalizations and the carriage of the head and neck, shifts into frequencies associated with communication rather than alarm. The digestive system relaxes. The immune system functions better. The animal is, in the deepest physiological sense of the word, at peace. This is not a metaphor. This is what is happening inside your horse's body when they exhale beside you. But here is what makes this so remarkable. The ventral vagal state is not just a state of calm, it is a state of connection. Porges found that this part of the nervous system evolved specifically to regulate social engagement, to allow mammals to be close to each other, to co-regulate, to signal safety to one another across the gap of separate bodies. It is literally the neurobiology of trust. Think about what that means for a moment. This system, this ventral vagal circuit, did not evolve for horses to use with other horses alone. Research on social mammals consistently shows that this circuitry can extend across species lines when the signals of safety are present and consistent enough to override the threat detection programming underneath. What this means practically is that a horse is not making an exception when they trust you. They are not overriding their biology as some kind of extraordinary act of generosity. They are using a neural circuit that exists precisely for this purpose. But that circuit has an extraordinarily high activation threshold. Because for most of evolutionary history, the creatures who triggered ventral vagal engagement in horses were other horses, never predators. The threshold exists as a filter, and you, a forward-eyed biped who moves with predatory efficiency, have to clear that filter every single time, until the filter learns that you are different. That learning is not cognitive. It is not a decision. It happens in the body, in the autonomic nervous system, before the horse's cortex pointe, the thinking brain, has processed anything at all. Which means the signals that matter most are not the things you do on purpose. They are the things your body does on its own. And for a horse, an animal whose entire evolutionary history has been defined by the need to detect danger in other creatures, activating this state requires something extraordinary. It requires their nervous system to receive consistent, repeated signals that override the threat detection program running beneath everything else. Researchers at the French National Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment, known as INRAE, have spent years studying how horses process stress and how they regulate their emotional states, particularly in the presence of humans. What they've found consistently is that horses don't just respond to what you do. They respond to what your body is communicating beneath what you do. Your breathing rate, the tension in your muscles, the micro movements of your posture. Horses pick up on physiological signals that most humans aren't even consciously aware of transmitting. In one significant body of research, INRAE scientists found that horses can detect changes in human heart rate variability, a measure of the rhythmic variation between heartbeats that correlate strongly with emotional state, and that they adjust their own physiological state in response. When the human beside them was internally calm, not just externally still, but genuinely regulated, the horse's own cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, dropped measurably. When the human was internally anxious, even if they appeared calm on the surface, the horse's stress markers remained elevated. Let that land for a moment. Your horse is not reading your behavior. They are reading your body. The truth your nervous system is telling, beneath the performance of calm that your mind might be constructing. They are, in the most literal sense, checking your interior weather before they decide whether it's safe to come inside. This is why experienced horse persons have always said that you cannot fake calm with a horse. It has always been treated as folk wisdom, a thing that trainers say. Now we know why it's true. The horse's nervous system is so attuned to the physiological signals of safety, to breath, to muscle tension, to heart rate, to the subtle postural language of a regulated body, that any internal incongruence registers as a threat signal. You cannot think yourself calm and expect the horse to believe it. And this is where the science gets genuinely astonishing. Because what INRAE's research and subsequent work done in collaboration with equine behavior labs across Europe suggests is that the process of building trust with a horse is, in a very real sense, a process of nervous system entrainment. Two bodies learning to regulate together. Entrainment is a word borrowed from physics, used to describe how two oscillating systems will gradually synchronize their rhythms through the subtle transmission of vibration. In biology, it describes something similar, the tendency of living systems, when in proximity and in relationship, to begin to mirror and align each other's physiological rhythms. Heart rates, breathing patterns, the cycling of stress hormones. What INRAE's work suggests, and what subsequent studies on horse-human dyads in both working and non-working contexts have supported, is that horses and humans in established trust relationships show measurable physiological synchrony. When the human's breathing slows and deepens, the horse's breathing follows. When the horse's heart rate drops into a regulated rhythm, the human's does too, often without either party being consciously aware that anything is happening. This is not mysticism. This is the mammalian nervous system doing what it evolved to do, using the proximity of another regulated body as a resource for its own regulation. What horses understood in their bodies before any of us had the words for it is that being near the right creature feels different. Not because of what that creature does, yet because of what their nervous system is broadcasting continuously and honestly to every other nervous system in range. Your horse has been reading that broadcast since the first day they met you, building a record, not in their cortex, not in any conscious cognitive sense, but in the deep, wordless intelligence of their autonomic nervous system, on whether your interior landscape is safe, whether your signal, day after day, tells them the same thing. Trust in this framework is not a threshold they cross once and stay on the other side of. It is an ongoing assessment, a living thing, which means it can deepen over time, and it can erode quietly if the signals change. At the University of Sussex, a team led by researcher Karen McComb has conducted some of the most detailed studies ever done on equine emotional cognition. The capacity of horses to perceive and respond to emotional information in their environment. What McComb's group found overturned something that had been assumed about horses for generations. Horses, it turns out, remember emotional experiences with people. Not just behavioral patterns, like not just this person is safe or this person hurts me, but emotional valence. How an interaction felt. The research showed that horses who had previously experienced a positive emotional interaction with a specific person showed measurably different physiological and behavioral responses when that person returned, even after a significant passage of time. Their heart rates were lower, their ear orientation, and a key indicator of attention and emotional state in horses was more relaxed. The muscles around their eyes, which horses use to communicate emotional states in ways that parallel human facial expression, were softer. They recognized the feeling of the person, not just the face, not just the smell, the emotional signature. In a follow-up study that has become one of the most widely cited in equine behavior research, McComb's team went further. They showed horses photographs of human faces, some expressing anger, some expressing calm or happiness, They found that horses not only distinguished between the emotional expressions in the photographs, but also cross-referenced them with real people they subsequently encountered. If a horse was shown a photograph of a person displaying an angry face and then met that same person, even when that person was now displaying a neutral or friendly expression, the horse's stress markers were elevated. They had formed an expectation based on the photograph, and that expectation colored the real interaction. This means horses are doing something cognitively complex that we have systematically underestimated. They are building emotional models of individual humans. They are tracking emotional consistency. They are asking on a neurological level whether the person in front of them is who they have proven themselves to be over time. Trust for a horse is not a door that opens. It is a model that builds, piece by piece, interaction by interaction, consistency stacked upon consistency, until the weight of accumulated safe experience finally tips the nervous system out of vigilance and into something that the polyvagal framework would call genuine ventral vagal engagement. The brain, when it arrives there, is changed, not metaphorically, structurally. Research on mammals more broadly, including studies on horses from Uppsala University in Sweden, where scientists have looked at the long-term effects of human-animal bonding on equine neurological development, suggests that repeated positive social engagement with trusted individuals actually influences the development and expression of oxytocin pathways in the brain. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is not just released during social contact. In animals with established trust relationships, the oxytocin system becomes more responsive over time. The brain, in a very real sense, learns to open. And the exhale, like that specific, audible, full-body exhale that every horse person knows and waits for, is not a coincidence. It is a measurable physiological event. It is the moment the parasympathetic nervous system takes the wheel. It is the moment the stress hormones that have been quietly maintaining a background level of vigilance drop below a threshold. It is the moment the horse's body decides at a level deeper than thought that right now, with this person, in this moment, it does not need to be afraid. 55 million years of evolution. And your horse chose to put that down. One, if you've been reading this and feeling something shift, a new weight behind something you've always taken for granted, then you already understand why what comes next matters so much. Because here's what the science tells us that most training approaches don't. The single most powerful thing you can do to build and sustain trust with your horse is to regulate yourself before you regulate them. Not techniques, not tools. You. When you walk toward the field distracted, carrying the residue of a hard day, your shoulders carrying tension you haven't released, you're breathing shallow from hours of sitting at a desk. Your horse feels this before you open the gate. Their stress system begins to activate not because of what you do, but because of what you are radiating. And if this happens consistently, they begin to associate your presence not with safety, but with a kind of low-grade alertness that never quite settles. This is not blame. It is information. It is the most useful information you can have. The practice then is simple to understand and genuinely difficult to do. Before you approach your horse, pause. Not for a performance, not to put on a calm face, but to actually arrive in your body. Take 3 slow breaths, not from your chest, but from your belly, the kind of breath that activates the very vagal pathways your horse is looking for. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench the muscles you've been holding since you sat down this morning. Give your nervous system a moment to shift state before you ask your horse's nervous system to trust you. Research on human-horse co-regulation consistently shows that this small preparation, this act of arriving physiologically, not just physically, has measurable effects on horse behavior and stress markers within the first few minutes of an interaction. The horse's ear orientation changes, their breathing slows, the muscle tension around their eyes releases. Because they are not responding to your intentions, they are responding to your state. This is also why the quality of your presence matters more than the quantity of your time. 2 hours in the field while you're anxious and distracted and mentally somewhere else does less for your horse's trust system than 20 minutes of genuine, regulated, fully present contact. The nervous system doesn't count hours. It counts the quality of signal. And a clean, icky, consistent signal of safety, even briefly, does more neurological work than a long, murky one. There is another piece of this that the science illuminates in a way that most horsemanship traditions have touched, but never quite named. It has to do with what happens in the space between interactions. When your horse trusts you, they don't stop processing you when you leave. Research on equine memory, particularly work from the University of Guelph in Canada, which has examined how horses consolidate social and emotional information over time, suggests that horses replay and consolidate emotionally significant experiences during rest states. This is not unique to horses. It mirrors what we know about memory consolidation in most mammals, including humans. But what it means practically is that every interaction you have with your horse continues to be processed after you've gone home. The good ones deepen. The confusing ones stay unresolved. The ones where you came in dysregulated and pushed through something that made them anxious, those get filed under this person, this feeling, and they color the next morning's greeting before you've done anything at all. This is not a reason to feel guilty about the bad days. It is a reason to understand that trust is not built in the dramatic moments. It is built in the accumulation of ordinary ones. The quiet approach, the hand that doesn't grab, the session that ends before the horse is overwhelmed, the day you could feel them bracing for pressure, and you chose instead to just stand beside them and breathe. Those moments are the ones that matter most. Not because they are impressive, but because they are consistent. And consistency, not kindness alone, not skill alone, but the reliable repetition of safety, is what the equine nervous system is listening for beneath everything else. Beyond this, pay attention to what you ask of your horse in moments when they are not yet fully regulated. One of the most common patterns that erodes trust slowly and almost invisibly is the habit of pushing through a horse's hesitation. Interpreting moments of tension or resistance as stubbornness or lack of respect, and applying pressure precisely when the animal's nervous system is telling you it needs the opposite. Every time a horse experiences a threat signal followed by increased pressure, the amygdala learns. It does not learn to tolerate the threat. It learns to expect escalation. And the next time you approach, it is already primed for what came before. This does not mean you never ask hard things of your horse. It means you learn to read the difference between behavioral resistance and neurological overwhelm. One is a communication, the other is a warning. And the horse whose trust you have, whose ventral vagal system has learned to associate you with safety, will show you the difference if you are paying attention. Notice the moments your horse breathes out around you. Not the polite snort, not the alarm snort. The slow, chest-emptying exhalation that comes from nowhere and means everything. In classical horsemanship traditions across cultures, this exhale has been recognized as a sign for centuries. Now we know what it is, at the level of the brainstem and the vagus nerve and the stress hormone system. It is the sound of a brain releasing vigilance. It is the sound of trust arriving in the body. Seek those moments. Create the conditions for them. Not by doing less, but by being more present, more regulated, more consistent in the emotional signature you bring through the gate every single time. And then there is this. What your horse's trust requires of you over time is not perfection. It is not the absence of bad days or complicated emotions or the inevitable moments when life comes through the gate with you and you cannot fully leave it outside. Horses understand fluctuation. What they are tracking is not whether you are always perfectly calm. What they are tracking is whether, even when things are hard, you are still fundamentally safe. Whether you are the kind of presence that, even in difficulty, does not become unpredictable, does not become threatening, does not make them pay for what belongs to the rest of your world. Consistency in character, not consistency in mood. That is what the equine nervous system is listening for. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Before I give you the last piece of this, drop a comment right now. Tell me your horse's name, and tell me the one moment when you first felt them truly let go around you. I read every single one. Think back to that moment at the fence. The afternoon light, your horse's jaw resting against your shoulder, that exhale. You probably felt in that moment as if your horse was giving you something, a gift, an offering, and you were right. It was. But now you know what it actually was. It was not a mood. It was not a preference. It was not your horse deciding you were likable. It was their nervous system after weeks or months or years of reading you. Reading your breathing, your tension, your internal weather, the consistency between who you were yesterday and who you are today. Finally arriving at a biological conclusion. A conclusion that registered not as a thought, but as a state. The ventral vagal brake releasing, the cortisol dropping below the threshold, the oxytocin pathways opening. It was their body deciding that with you, the ancient alarm could finally go quiet. You did not just earn their trust, you gave their brain permission to rest. And if you think about what that means for an animal that has never, not once in 55 million years, had the luxury of resting, of truly neurologically resting, in the presence of a predator. And then that exhale is not a small thing. It is one of the most profound things one living creature can offer another. Your horse looked at everything you are, what you carry, how you breathe, the truth your body tells when you think no one is listening. And they decided you were worth the risk, not the technique, not the halter, not the grain bucket. You. Carry that with you the next time you open the gate. Carry it the next time you're distracted or rushed or not quite present. Because they will notice, and it will matter. And somewhere in the deepest part of what you share with that animal, the conversation about safety is always continuing, long after you've gone home for the night. If this video found you at the right moment, share it with someone who loves their horse. They need to see this too. And I'll see you in the next one. If this is already changing how you see your horse, subscribe to the Horse Soul Man, because what's coming next is even harder to believe.